G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you're also having a fantastic weekend. Now, I'm not sure about where you live in the world, but today here in Australia and over the next coming few weeks, it is going to be absolutely smoking hot. So if you see me sweating under this light, well, you're just going to have to put up with it. But legends, as always, of course, we have a lot to go over. Of course, we will be looking at the maps, and we do have some significant changes on the maps. With these maps, I will be overlaying you Ukrainian maps, neutral maps, Russian maps, as well as showing geolocations as well to absolutely confirm where things are moving. I have a miscellaneous folder to look at weapon systems and other bits of policy or politics. I want to talk about how the US is starting, I guess, to come around now that the adults are in charge there again, to talk about the reality of what is happening here and see what some officials are saying. I want to show you some satellite imagery and some intel that I've been sent across as well about what we may see of an increased bombing campaign in the coming weeks or months by the Russian Air Force. And then I want to talk about the reduction in North Korean troops. So where I want to start is actually with Mr. Mark Rubio in this interview here. Now, this is on the Megyn Kelly show with US Secretary of State. Of course, Mr. Trump appointed Senator at one point, Mark Rubio. So the question is, and you can find this whole interview, Ukraine's another issue that got the party divided. And he goes on, the complete question here by Megyn Kelly is, you've got a lot, I'm just sticking with the Republicans now because there's a whole other debate with the other side of the aisle, but who say, no, Putin's a bad actor, Russia's a growing threat, and we're doing the right thing by backing Ukraine. And I would say the majority of Republicans now are against that viewpoint and think we've lost and that we've spent too much. It's any place from $105 billion to $187 billion, and they've lost. We just have to be realistic about the fact that Ukraine has lost. It's not going to gain back any of this ground, and we need a negotiated settlement now before we keep throwing good money after bad, and we can't afford it. We've got Americans who are suffering now. I think that's the majority view on the Republican side now. So Megyn is saying here, is this how the majority of Republicans are seeing it? Because that's what it looks like to us. And Secretary Rubio is saying it also happens to be the reality on the ground. First, let me say this. We think what Putin did was terrible, invading a country, the atrocities he's committed. He did horrible things. But what? The dishonesty has existed is that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine would be able not just to defeat Russia, but to destroy them, push them all the way back to what the world looked like in 2012 and 2014. So saying that the Biden administration, the dishonesty that they put forward, they led people to believe they're in official capacity in Ukraine, to the media, to everyone, that not only defeat, but destroy the Russian forces, and that the reality that Rubio is putting forward here. Before the Russians even took Crimea. So we're essentially talking the 1991 borders. And then the result. What they've been asking for the last year and a half is to fund a stalemate, a protracted stalemate, in which human suffering continues. Now, we'll see this stalemate brought up a lot. And in my opinion, and I'm going to show you the 22, 23, 24, and beginning of 25 kilometre square movements, that stalemate has ended over the past 12 months, especially the last 6. Meanwhile, Ukraine is being set back 100 years. Their energy grid is being wiped out. I mean, someone's going to have to pay for all this reconstruction after the fact. And how many Ukrainians have left Ukraine, living in other countries now? They may never return. I mean, that's their future, and it's in danger in that regard. So speaking here of something we bring up a lot is post-war attrition. And in this video today, we're also going to touch on Russia's post-war attrition and frozen assets as well. So the president's point of view is this is a protracted conflict and needs to end. Now, it needs to end through negotiation. In any negotiation, both sides are going to have to give something up. Both sides in a negotiation have to give something. And that's going to take time. But at least we have a president that recognises that our objective is this conflict needs to end. And it needs to end in a way that's enduring because it's unsustainable on all sides. Russia's paying a big price for this in their own economy, their inflation rate and the like. But at the end, that's the president's position, and it's the truth. And I think even a growing number of Democrats would now acknowledge that's what we have been funding is a stalemate, a protracted conflict, and maybe even worse than a stalemate, one in which incrementally Ukraine is being destroyed and losing more and more territory. So this conflict needs to end on both sides. Who's the bigger problem? In reaching a final negotiated settlement, is it Putin or Zelensky? There's a report out that the Ukrainians are just banking on Putin digging his heels in, becoming annoying to President Trump on this because he won't give an inch. And they're hoping President Trump will come back over closer to their worldview about Putin, about Russia, and about this conflict. That eventually, because Putin's not going to move an inch, that Trump's only way will be through further support of the Ukrainian forces. Secretary Rubio says, well, I think there's the public and there's the private. What is said in public and private is very different. You and I touched on this the other day, and we have seen Trump saying that Zelensky wants an end as soon as possible, which is different to what we have heard publicly. So what you see portrayed publicly in conversations and what leaders say, a lot of it is speaking. They have domestic politics and political considerations. Even Vladimir Putin, who controls media, still has to care about what public opinion is in Russia and his image, how his entire personality is built around this. But as far as who's going to be harder to bring to the table, well, America, through military aid, economic aid, all of this, can bring Ukraine to the table as soon as they want to. I think it's going to be hardest to convince Putin that he can't achieve further goals here. Putin and his generals, I believe, are assessing that Ukraine has a critical manpower shortage that is worsening, and that the longer they push, it's going to get worse and worse and eventually easier and easier, and they're going to make more ground and get in a better position as time goes on. Of course, every day is greatly affecting Russia's economy, but I don't believe as quickly as it is affecting the manpower in Ukraine. And in this calculation, they'll be going, it doesn't matter what is delivered further, because you can deliver Patriot systems, but we know people of the Air Force are getting moved across onto the front line, that eventually it's going to become an existential problem to have just infantry soldiers, and we will take more and more. Like I said, though, this is going to affect Russia's economy the longer and longer this goes on. And of course, that goes into Russia's post-war attrition. What we're going to speak about, though, is that the more ground that Putin gains, potentially he will buffer this post-war attrition by gaining billions into the trillions of natural resource. Now, they talk about the photographs of some shirtless photographs of Putin. And then he goes, well, the point is that he's got his own domestic considerations, and so does Zelensky. I mean, at the end of the day, he's got, if you image, you're a Ukrainian. The Russians have made you suffer so much, and now you're going to let them keep land. I mean, the people would be upset about that in Ukraine, and you would understand it. And then there's the mature realities of life on this planet. And this is something I think is going to be a massive, massive sticking point, is the idea that if an inch of ground remains occupied, that the war is not over, the war has been lost, and everything else in that train of thought. And it's very measurable there. It will be very interesting to see if there is any unrest internally in Ukraine or against Mr. Zelensky, knowing the amount that everyone there, especially those soldiers and especially some of those nationalist units, what they have suffered through. To what he's saying is the reality of this war is that there is going to be considerations made, negotiations made, and each side is going to have to give some up. Both sides are paying a heavy price for this. Both sides have incentive for this conflict to end. Both sides are in. It's not going to end with the maximalist goals of either side. The Putin's not going to reach his goals, nor is Zelensky. So I spoke about that post-war attrition and how the more ground Putin gains, the more and more it may actually buffer this. So I went on to DeepSeek, and I basically asked, well, if Putin was to take the 4 oblasts that he's looking to take, and I haven't even included Crimea in this, how much in natural resources would this actually be, potentially to buffer the post-war attrition and the $300 billion that has been, of course, frozen from the Russian banks? The Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson regions of Ukraine are rich in natural resources. If Russia were to occupy these regions, the economic value of the natural resources would be significant. Through precise figures depend on market conditions, extraction costs, and the extent of control. So in this, we're not looking at market prices, of course that fluctuates, or the cost of pulling that out of the ground. Coal, you're looking at $5 to $7.5 trillion. Iron ore, $450 to $540 billion. Natural gas, somewhere $3 to $5 trillion. Manganese, $460 to $690 billion. Agricultural land, $5 to $10 billion annually. Other minerals, $100 to $200 billion. Now, before we get into the total of this is what Russia may be gaining, but it's also what then Ukraine will also be losing. And of course, this to rebuild Ukraine and the American companies, the European companies getting access to this as well. Total estimated values. Combining these resources, the total estimated value of the natural resources in these regions could range from $9 to $14 trillion. Remember, we have heard American politicians say in and around the 10 to 11 trillion mark. This is a rough estimate and depends on factors like market prices and extraction costs. So I don't know what the markup is on each one of these. But even if we talk 10 or 20%, which is probably significantly more than that, we're talking in the trillions of dollars. So in the end of the day, that few $100 billion, that is a astronomical amount of money that is frozen from oligarchs. If Russia is to take this land, Putin, the Kremlin, will be able to pay back the oligarchs who have lost a lot of money here through these, therefore keeping a lid on any uprisings from leaders of some of those major businesses and positions of power as well. So this is a real problem if Russia is to walk away with this, because that would massively buffer its post-war attrition that is primarily economic, but also it would have huge impact on Ukraine's economic future. And of course, if accepted into the EU and America, the economic capacity to rebuild as well, losing out on trillions of dollars. So let's have a look at our miscellaneous folder as always. Now, we have been speaking over the past few weeks that there has been a dramatic increase, at least in footage that I am seeing. Of course, you've got correlation and causation. So just because you're seeing more, it doesn't directly mean that it is happening more, we're just seeing it more, so maybe it's just released, but we have seen a massive increase in multiple launch rocket systems, thermobaric rockets, typically TOS-1, but we have been seeing, and I know History Legends has spoken a lot about TOS-2, which is like a wheeled, newer variant with longer range. The biggest problem with TOS-1 was its limited range is highly susceptible to FPV drones. And footage has been released today of TOS-2. Of course, wheeled platform is far more maneuverable. Firing said to be a new incendiary munition. So we can see the TOS-2 firing here. And then we can see under then drone footage, the incendiary munition hitting positions. Now, I don't have a geolocation of where this may be, but you can see the destructive power and the burning of these incendiary munitions. So away from thermobaric to some level of incendiary. Now, I don't know too much about this munition. I will keep digging into, see exactly what this is and if we will see this more and more on the front line. But we are seeing more and more thermobarics, and we did speak about earlier this week that it may be TOS-2 or 3 with that longer range entering the battlefield. Now, earlier this week or late last week, we spoke about, of course, the chief of Ukraine's military intelligence, Mr. Budanov, speaking that if there's not negotiations by summer, which is now under 4 months away, it's a threat to Ukraine's very existence. Now, the SBU is looking into this. Of course, the SBU is the Security Service of Ukraine, and they've launched a criminal investigation following media reports alleging that Ukraine's spy chief made a statement about a threat to the country's existence during a closed-door parliamentary meeting. The case was opened under the legal provision on the disclosure of state secrets. So what Ukrainska Pravda reported is that the head of the military intelligence, GUR, warned of serious consequences for Ukraine's existence if negotiations do not begin by summer. And of course, this was ignored by most, but picked up by many. Now, the GUR has denied this report, calling the alleged quote attributed to Budanov false. Again, we will see, but we have seen that the SBU has opened an investigation into who leaks that, and as well, I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that investigation. So let's have a look at the fab and bombing increase that we may see, and what I've been sent over with some satellite imagery as well. So we'll go through some of the satellite imagery. Now, this isn't the best quality ever, but this is from October 2024 on a Russian air base. I'll show you where this is in a second. And then we come to January on the same air base and talking about significant buildup of both aircraft here as well as hangars being shown in areas on these bases. Now, it is not super clear due to some of the cloud cover over these bases, and we try and line up similar areas. So you can see we can line up where this like apron is. They're back in October that there are no hangars or fortified areas over where these planes would sit, and then we look to January 25 that we can see that there are then hangars, fortified areas over the top of where these planes would be sitting. Now, this is the airbase out here. This is where we're talking at Milerovo. We're talking 200 kilometers to Kramatorsk, 252 to Kharkiv, and 282 to Velyka Novosilka. I've also put in the miles there if you're from that side of the world. Let's look at what I was sent across. At the Milerovo airbase at this exact geolocation, significant expansion of the airbase has been observed since December 24, including the construction of additional hangars and ammunition storage facilities. There has also been notable development of defensive fortifications and bunkers, likely intended to provide protection against airstrikes, artillery, and drone attacks. A substantial concentration of transport and fighter aircraft, ammunition stockpiles, and logistics support vehicles have been observed at the site. Milerovo Airbase is situated within 100 kilometres of the Russian Federation forward line of own troops, FLOT. Ukrainian armed forces air defense systems such as NASAMS or RST may be deployed near the Ukrainian armed forces' first line of troops. The likely intent of the Russian Federation Air Force is to conduct deliberate operations against Ukrainian armed forces' air defense systems before initiating sustained air operations in support of further ground offensives in the Donbass region. This would involve the use of FAB, so glide bomb, munitions against Ukrainian armed forces' fortified positions, and the provision of close air support to ground forces. Current assessments indicate a projected increase in combat bombing and reconnaissance missions originating from the Milerovo airbase, targeting Ukrainian armed forces forward line of own troop positions and rear area concentrations in February 2025. So of course today is the first day of February 2025, and there has been a lot of talk about this. Of course, we showed you this earlier this week, of course, that there was through December a reduction of Russia dropping FAB glide bombs, but this has apparently fully recovered, averaging 75 FABs per day, with some days exceeding 100. And we did a full breakdown of this, but there has been a dip in FAB usage, primarily due to weather and potentially to some command policy as well. But there is no good reason to suggest that there should be any drop in the industry making these simple-ish weapon systems. But we have seen a significant drop in claimed or confirmed Su-34 losses. The last confirmed loss was on November the 1st. The one before that was on the 12th of November, and this is confirmed by both fighter bomber and Ukrainian armed forces. From United Aircraft Company, when we visually confirm any new aircraft rolling off their production line, and then we take in the confirmed losses, in my research, that Russia is in a net positive of aircraft for 2024. So we have seen a reduction in FABs, but there is no good reason why these FABs, the industry producing these, would have slowed down at all. So with the build-up at Milerovo, with the reduction due to the weather, once the weather improves, we may see a huge amount of this on further operations from the Russian forces. And we shared this along with it. Of course, that graph comes from Vitaly here. There's a preliminary indicator of exhaustion. It's an indicator of regrouping. Kramatorsk will be the next big target after Pokrovsk, and should they start working on offensive setup. And we spoke back then about these problems, but once that ground either freezes and or starts improving for ground movements, we may see a huge amount of FABs and further movements. And AMK is saying this today, at least 8 FAB glide bombs struck Pokrovsk within half an hour today. Probably not part of an intensified bombing campaign, but there has been intensified shelling of this area to the north of the city. And we see FABs then just above, in a town above Velyka Novosilka, have struck as well. There's been a lot of FAB usage over the past 24 hours. Build up at air bases, we can see this is easy distance for fighter aircraft flying very quickly. You can see where the border of Ukraine and Russia is, a very strategically important location, but of course a location that can be susceptible to Ukrainian missiles and drones as well. That is why we're seeing build up here. So will we see intensified bombing campaigns? So let's have a look at the maps. And before we explain where the maps are, I want to talk about relative movements, because when I say large movements, people go, it's only or just over 300 kilometre squares over January. But let's look at how this is relative to the years gone past. So we see by Deep State, by a Ukrainian sources map, January, that the Russians gained 325 kilometre squares. Now, what we said was this is about July to August, sits between these two of gains. So not as slow as the beginning of last year, more to mid last year. But we can see that relative, this is a lot. Let's have a look back in 2023. This is still significantly more than any Russian gain in the beginning or end, or more than any of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. So Russia has gained in this year, in the poor conditions in winter when we expected a withdrawal, still more than the counteroffensive in 2023. So when I say it is relatively a lot, I believe relative to years gone past, it is a lot. So Deep State saying close enough to 326 kilometre squares were gained over a January. Now let's have a look at AMK. AMK is saying that it's more like 498 kilometre squares and that Ukraine had advancement of 19.36 kilometre squares. Now, if we do a net change, we just have to deduct 19 off this 498. So we're talking around about 480 kilometre squares, which is an increase of, 150-ish over Deep State. So what I will be doing from now on, if AMK keep releasing that, I will be adding this onto this as well to have a look between Warmapper, Deep State, because you can see how some of these numbers can be dramatically different. So that is good to know that over January, what his advancement says it is. Because remember, there can always be incentive for maps to not show gains or to show gains or however, so we try and get as many different sources as we can. So of course, here's the map. You've got Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The red check that you're going to see is ground made by the Russian forces over the past 24 hours. Now, where should we go first? Let's actually go down into Chasiv Yar. Of course, you're familiar with this area. You're familiar with Bakhmut, and of course, you're now familiar with Chasiv Yar, as Chasiv Yar slowly comes under the control of the Russian forces. This ground in here is very, very important for the high ground before Konstantinivka and Kramatorsk. Of course, that bombing campaign that we showed you and the build-up, they could absolutely be critical for these areas. Now, I won't show you all of this footage, but this footage is available on my Telegram if you would like to see it, of battles between Ukrainian infantry and Russian infantry. So where this is then geolocated is just where this, it's basically in line with this dogleg, but back on this road. So right where my cursor is at the moment. So rough estimate of 1.2 kilometers behind the line. Remember, we have seen Russian forces right down around where my cursor is at the moment recently. So operating further out, definitely gray zone. Probably not red at this point in time. At least that footage isn't beyond doubt to say that it is red, but it's definitely grey. So in the footage, we see it's a bit unclear, but it looks like a Ukrainian soldier is actually returning to a bunker. So we see like a Russian infantry move in, and then like these soldiers come back. Therein, of course, a massive shootout. One thing we do see is it seems that the Russian infantry is working with a drone team, relaying then information, surveillance, reconnaissance from the drone back to the soldiers. That's what it looks like, as well as targeting with drones. And we do see Ukrainian artillery shelling on that position as well. So very interesting bit of footage of some level of combined arms with drones we're looking at there as well. Then we have DivGen map. Now, what DivGen is showing, of course, where we showed you is where these two roads, see this dog leg, then around where it comes, where we are talking is right on here. Now, this is the same area. It just looks slightly different. He's showing there is movement in from this area. So he is basically confirming where that movement, that footage we saw was on his map. So let's move actually down into, we'll see here, I don't have another map to back this up, but being a Russian movement on a Ukrainian map, I'm more likely to believe that than a Russian movement on a Russian map, if that makes sense, and vice versa. So we see Baranivkia, the majority of this coming under Russian occupation. We then see movement back into Udashny. Remember, the Russians have been in and out of here. Ukraine is pouring a lot of resources into Udashny because this right here is the border of Dnipro. For information, for movement on Pokrovsk, of course, Russia entering Dnipro is a bad thing for Ukraine's informational war. Now, we have the island boys hanging out in Andrivkia. We have more movements from Petropavlivkia towards this direction, and of course, coming up from the north of Sukriyali as well. So we have a number of updates on this front. Let's firstly look at what AMK is showing. So in the direction of Rozliv towards Constantinople, he's showing a large advancement in this direction here, basically where this grey zone has been showing now for a few days. That AMK is showing that there is movements, but see where this like waterway is running on this angle? Basically right up in direction of this. Remember, there are a lot of reports of Russian forces being right up around Constantinople and Ulaki as well. He's showing further movements around Andrivkia too. Now, let's have a look at then DivGen map. He is showing in this same direction down here. He is showing more movement. Now, he is showing more northern movement, but again, if you've watched me for a while, what we know is if both maps are showing at least movement on this axis, we can confirm there has been movement. As far as exactly how much, well, what the DivGen is showing is up to this tree line in here. So again, movement up to that tree line would make sense, but until we have geolocations or both maps show the same, we'll still take it under notice. So let's have a look at a bridge that has been taken out. So in Constantinople, right in here, and we'll zoom in on this, you'll get this waterway sort of coming out to the west and this waterway coming straight down. You'll see this in the footage, that there is a Russian missile take out a Ukrainian pontoon bridge. Now, we have seen a lot of pontoon bridges as well as bridges taken out in this area. So you can see where this heads off to the west here. We showed you that on the map. We zoom out to the drone, and then we will see a Russian missile reported as an Iskander then hitting this pontoon, taking down that pontoon bridge, further making, so it's right in here, further making this whole pocket in here more and more difficult to defend or launch any counter actions. We come down, this is Velyka Novosilka, where I'm sure you're familiar with, or you've never heard about if you only watch then a lot of propagandists on this website. And we look at Rozdolny and movement up to this road, confirmed by AMK mapping. So that is what we like when things actually line up. Come down, Rivnopil, further west movement in the direction of Novopil. Remember, this is turning back gains in the 2023 counter-offensive. Bring up then AMK mapping. Furthermore, we can confirm that this has moved in that direction because all these maps are showing it. Now, we will go up into the northeast and then we'll come back down to Toretsk. Now, across the Oskil, of course, this is Kupiansk here, very, very important. Kharkiv Oblast, Dovrychnia, some maps are saying is completely under control. Just north of here, though, the Russians have gained another foothold on the western side of the Oskil. This one down here was important when it happened. We didn't know if the Russians could hold it. Now they have for a number of weeks held this, and now another one has been held. And then, of course, occupying Novomilinsk as well. And this is confirmed across multiple different maps. And we'll read what Deep State says about this. This is DivGen map here. Now here's showing more movement out around Dovrychnia. We'll ignore that for the time being. And he's showing more movement up around this front too. So we can confirm this 100% occurred. Now, he is showing a little bit further north. You can see where these mountains are. So he's right up to where my cursor is here. But it is, fairly, considering fairly close, within 600 meters. But we can confirm that movement took place. And I have been saying this area up here, this is a good barometer to get an idea of how few reserves there must be, because this should have been fairly easy to push back, because the Russians have to cross then a bloody river in here. Now, areas may be frozen, but it's still difficult to move equipment and everything across. Crossing anything like this is a bloody nightmare when there's drones. It's going to make it easier to defend. And they haven't been able to cross this. And in the initial phase when this was being crossed, reserves should have been here to easily push this back, as we have seen the Ukrainian forces do successfully before, but haven't been able to. I think this is a good indicator to show how short on reserves there actually are. Now, let's look at Deep State and what they are saying about this. The enemy has once again taken control of Novomlinsk in the Kharkiv region. Remember, Ukraine got these areas back at the end of 2022. In early December, the defense forces cleared one of the organized Russian bridgeheads, which had formed in the village of Novomlinsk. Then attention was shifted to the second one at the Mozyvka area, which has now spread all the way to Toretsk, which the enemy has gradually absorbing. This is what we have been saying, is that in previous times it has formed and been able to push out, but at this time they've crossed and now are expanding here too. This marking on the map in Novomlinsk is more of a clarification than new advance, as the village was occupied about a few weeks ago. We hoped that the situation would improve, but the command attached little importance to it. Now, this is funny because, okay, it was occupied a few weeks ago, hoping that it would improve, so you haven't shown it, hoping it would then, you wouldn't end up having to show it? Sus. We have repeatedly drawn attention to the problem in this area, which was formed at the beginning and was a consequence of the enemy's advances. And today it is progressing. Having occupied Novomlinsk, the Russians are constantly increasing the number of infantry in the settlement, deploying means of destruction and fortifying the territory. The further and the more difficult it will be to eliminate this bridgehead, because now the bastards are taking into account previous mistakes. At the same time, the situation in Dovrichnia is not getting better. And again, the further and further they push in, eventually we'll be out of range of drones and then out of range of artillery, and forming the northern flank around Kupiansk and further pushing into Kharkiv Oblast. And you can see why the exchange fund of Kursk is not as much ground as being held in Kharkiv. So, that's going to have an awful lot to do in negotiations with showing that Kursk was not the bloody silver bullet that everyone thought it was going to be. So let's have a look down in Toretsk. Now, some maps are saying that Toretsk for a couple of days has been completely occupied. Let's have a look at another few maps in this direction. So we have the first DivGen map, and this is showing between Nelepivkia and Toretsk itself, Zaliznay area. Now, this can actually be a little bit difficult to show because these are significantly different. So to get an idea of where this area right here is this slag or spoil pit from a mine. So showing basically straight down here and across through fortifications. So significantly different. Say from here down to here, it's showing about 4 kilometers different. So showing basically, because it can be difficult to see these maps, something more like this. Of course, this is a significant change if it is true. Remember, Syriac has been showing this for a while. I can't wait for Syriac to come back and give us his updates. I think his reliability, he has been one of, if not the best. Now, further, let's have a look in sort of the northern outskirt of Toretsk, around this Kraminsk as well. So where we're looking, we have Kraminsky in here. Now, it's not easy to see, but you can sort of line up where some of the tree lines and some of these water reservoirs is. It's just around this sector. You can see, though, where the city sort of boundary ends and taking some of these areas towards Dashny up in here. So right in where my cursor is at the moment. If you want me to line any of this up, I can do it better at a later date. Now we have Leonidivka, Petrivka, where Suryak over the past few months has shown there has been Russian movements in and back out of certain areas. Again, because these show so significantly different, it's not the easiest thing to actually find on the maps. So we have in Nelepivkia, where it's showing that the Russians had an advancement more recently. But what we want to be looking for is where this dogleg in the road is and where this triangle treed paddock is. Okay? Triangle treed paddock here and right here. Zoom out a little bit and we come up that it's showing right up in and around this sector. We can see where this road connects, where my cursor is. This is said road right here. So the Russians are right up in this direction according to DivGen map. So rough estimate, some 3.6 kilometers or 2.25 miles behind where that front line is showing. So that is dramatic if true. Changes on this. Remember, if negotiations take place at some point, one thing we will get is a much better idea of where the front line is actually sitting, where some maps are underestimating and where some may be overestimating. Now, we'll come back into Kursk Oblast, somewhere where we have spoken again and again that we do not really understand. The big news about Kursk, well, more recently was the new Ukrainian offensive in here, which lasted under a day, that didn't really gain anything back. And of course, the North Koreans entering here. But we see this coming out. North Korean troops no longer seen on front lines fighting in Ukraine. It's being reported that North Korean soldiers who joined their Russian allies in battle against Ukrainian forces have been pulled off the front lines after suffering heavy casualties. The North Korean troops sent to bolster Russian forces trying to push back a Ukrainian offensive inside Russia's borders have not been seen at the front for about 2 weeks. Okay, we did say once Seoul, South Korea, rejected giving Ukraine weapons at wartime, that very likely we would see a lot less reporting of this. What have we seen? We've seen Seoul say, yep, even though we see with our special services, we see that this is happening, we're still not going to give weapons because it's against our laws and constitution. And what have we seen? We're seeing less reporting on it. Now, I do not doubt that at some point there are or were North Korean soldiers operating around this area. But the numbers that we were given, hundreds dying in each attack, thousands overall, and the evidence that we saw didn't add up. We got a few videos that show North Korean POWs, a few of them, but we're hearing about thousands upon thousands dying and soldiers saying that I feel bad of how many are dying and that we can't speak the language, but we're hearing them yell out for Kim Jong-un before taking their own life. And it just seemed like, yeah, I don't doubt that there's there, but I doubt if it's as dramatic as is being reported because there's a lot of incentive for this to be true. As reported, arrival of around 11,000 North Korean troops in Russia in November caused alarm in Ukraine and amongst its allies in the West. But in just 3 months, the North Korean ranks have diminished by half, according to General Sursky. Critics of Ukraine's leadership and people that know and look at protracted attritional warfare doctrine and go, this doesn't make sense. And you know what is being shown? I think it's being shown that we were overwhelmingly correct. Where could those best trained soldiers and best weapons and tanks be used? Fucking other areas down in the south and east, but they're tied up in here, and to actually withdraw that is going to be incredibly costly. You don't need to be a critic to look at this doctrine and go, what we know about warfare over hundreds of years is not lining up with what is being conducted here. And we've followed the bouncing ball and shown, at least to what I believe, that we were correct. Zelensky of Ukraine has insisted on holding the territory for as long as possible as a bargaining chip for future peace negotiations. Kilometre square is less than what Russia occupy in Kharkiv, and there's no vital industrial resource in that area. I believe Ukraine can't actually fully withdraw out of here at the moment because of the amount of troops that Russia has amassed here would cross into Sumy. We have seen increased targeting of Sumy as well as to try and cross back over that border. It's going to be very, very costly as well. But I do say hasn't captured any vital industrial centres. Although a lot of Ukraine's industry is PR and propaganda, because their industrial centre is in the West and they need to keep on good terms and the we're winning attitude to get more of that. But what I say is PR does not win wars. Like we see here, the longer Ukrainian troops hold Kursk, the more embarrassing it becomes for Russia's President Vladimir Putin. I think that initial embarrassment has almost fully worn off at this point in time. But like I'll say again, is PR does not win wars. Yes, PR helps Ukraine's industry and money and military aid, all of that. I get that part of it. But it is not a healthy balance of strategy, tactic, and PR at the moment. It's all lent PR of drone strikes, of Kursk, of this or that. That propaganda needs to be in support of military operations. Military operation can't be the propaganda itself. I know it can help, but it needs to be a healthy balance of this. And in my opinion, the resources put toward the PR at the moment is significantly more than trying to affect actual frontline tactical improvements. Many of the soldiers are among North Korea's best trained special operations troops, but the Russians appear to have used them as foot soldiers, sending them forth in waves across fields studded with landmines to be mowed down by heavy Ukrainian fire. Again, I was an infantry soldier, and again, if you're not given armoured vehicles, and moving armoured vehicles through these areas of massive mines and artillery as well is incredibly difficult. Look at from Ukraine's offensives to Russians' offensives. This is light infantry movement. In what I saw here, yeah, you could criticise the spacing, but as soon as fucking bombs start going off, fucking spacing goes out the window, people looking for cover. This, to me, people saying human waves, light infantry movement. You speak to someone who has served in the infantry. And again, this claimed 4,000 or more casualties, with the evidence, some of which being interviews, yes, and we accept that, but some of which being dots on a video and saying, yeah, they're all the ghost of Pyongyang. And we're going, well, we want things beyond reasonable doubt. 4,000 and you've got 1.0 POWs, it's not really adding up. Again, we have to be on the side of caution when we're speaking about international bloody incidents. In any case, the fight to expel the Ukrainian force from Kursk is far from over. A few weeks ago, the Ukrainian forces launched a new offensive in the region, but they have been hammered by Russian defences. This lasted around 24 hours. At one point, it was like the biggest thing going, and then it really did peter out. Again, launching new offensives in this area, an area where the logistics and artillery is not in your favour, you're surrounded on three sides, while other areas like Velyka Novosilka or Dashny, Toretsk, Chasiv Yar are falling. They say Russian forces have been able to retake about half of that. It's really about 2/3. North Korea has also supplied Russia with millions of artillery shells. Of course, this comes after Putin met with Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, where they restored a Cold War era treaty of mutual defence and military cooperation between their countries. And being that it was in Russia, that we could see this come into play. We would have been very, very interested to see if Ukraine pulled out of Kursk and there was a crossing into Sumy and the North Koreans were there, would have they crossed as well, or would have it just been part of this defence treaty? Be interesting to see. But at the end of the day, the reason why we're always so careful with this, and I've had people legitimately try and blackmail me over saying, I want to see evidence of this before I 100% confirm it. The reason we're always so careful of this is there was always far more incentive for this to be true for Ukraine than Russia. That Russia's need for a relatively small amount of inexperienced soldiers who don't speak the language versus potential to get South Korean weapons, a third country getting involved, so you may get more, that the incentive is far more. And this did pay off. We did see, because of this, that we did see long-range strikes. But like we said at the time, if the South Koreans don't end up going, you will have access to our industry, that it may peter off, and we're seeing a bit of that. Now, what I was told, and what I'm still sort of believing in this story, because all propaganda, all effective propaganda, has an element of truth, but you expand on that truth. And what I was told off a source is that, and I've shared this with you, is that North Korean forces, they're coming into Russia to use their own 170mm artillery guns. Russia does not operate these guns, nor do they make the ammunition for these guns. And Russia did not want to free up and retrain artillery forces or conscript more men to be artillery operators for a system they don't make the rounds on and that is a inferior gun to their own. So they'll just bring in North Koreans to operate their own artillery systems, while some of the North Korean Special Forces troops would work inside Russian forces to gain experience to return to North Korea and proliferate that training throughout the North Korean forces. That is what I was told, and I believe that is probably more realistic of what we have seen. It makes more sense in that way, and I think if we were to apply Occam's razor theory to that, that adds up more than there's just waves of troops going forward into just the abyss and that there's thousands and thousands, but very, very little concrete evidence as well. And when there's incentive involved, we need to always be on the side of caution, even if our leaders are not. Legends, look after yourselves. Have a great day. I need to get out of this light. It is boiling hot. Even in here, it's hot. Have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.